Hey everybody, this is Amr for ClickBliss.net, here to bring you my review and some gameplay for Utawarerumono ZAN. Utawarerumono ZAN is a retelling of the second game in the series, Mask of Deception, which largely branches off to a different story from the original Utawarerumono, but ties into the third game in the series, Mask of Truth. It retains the visual novel-based storytelling, while replacing the strategy layer of the game with more action RPG style combat similar to something you'd see in Tecmo Koei's Warriors or Musou series. In order to fit the story into the mold of an action game, it cuts down a lot of the events and abridges them in order to fit a 40-hour story into a neat probably 10 hours. So we're gonna jump right in here, take a look at the way the story is told. You'll see a lot of narration and voiceover like this that sort of summarizes a bunch of different events and then gets right into the key moments right before battles and things like that. Immediately runs into problems adapting the original story. Mask of Deception really was heavy on the novel part of the visual novel, and it could sometimes take hours between battles, to the point where I kind of forgot that there was a strategy game part to Utawarerumono for a while. Like several times I kept going like, oh right, there's this. So that's not really exactly ideal for an action game, so they've kind of summarized a whole bunch of stuff to get to the meat of things. The thing that you're going to see right here for this first mission is about maybe an hour to 2 hours in the visual novel to get to this part, which it kind of gets to in about 5 minutes, so it can get you right into the action. So that kind of brings down a 40-hour game into 18 chapters that take probably like a neat 10 hours to tell. Less if you skip the story scenes. Those key scenes themselves are still here. They're told without the kind of hand-drawn portraits, but rather with these in-game models, which don't look so hot within kind of the sparse backgrounds of this game, which you can kind of see here already. But they look generally pretty good in the dialogue scenes and stuff like that. They're animated well enough, and the more controlled lighting helps a little bit with their appearance. And they do give kind of a broad imitation of the hand-drawn art, even if they don't look anywhere near as good. And there are still some impressive performances as far as voice acting, as well as the dialogue is mostly the same, so it still has a pretty evocative feel in a lot of points that communicates just as well as the original. The story still does suffer from this truncated telling. The characters kind of fit into a lot of broad archetypes, and the characters fit into a lot of broad archetypes, and the abridged retelling of the story leans heavily on those for you to understand them, and kind of takes out some of the subtleties and small moments that helped make Mask of Deception work well. And it definitely, there's like a couple scenes that definitely feel flatter and definitely destroys tension when your character's supposed to be a little bit vulnerable and weak, at least at the start, and this first mission immediately has you destroy 100 people. So we're gonna skip all this and move right into the combat. From here, this is our party organization screen, pretty standard stuff. You can organize your party. In this point of the story, all these characters are locked, but you can also pick different sigils. The fire one will give you more attack, and the earth one will give you more defense. There's a couple more that you can earn along the way, but these are actually the only two I've gotten through just doing the story and a bunch of different missions. you will see the level of the sigils go up depending on your party makeup. Different characters have different affinities, similar to the original strategy game. You can also go into the edit units. You can see I've got quite a few of them unlocked. Here you can pick a couple different pieces of equipment. These will, you know, do things like boost attack or pull or push aggro on enemies in case you want to build something around that. You got different special techniques. Instead of, while this game is very Musou-like, and that the basic combat feels very similar, it uses a lot of concepts from the strategy games instead. So rather than having Musou attacks, you have kind of more regular RPG style skills that you can employ as you build up Zeal, which is the series' equivalent of mana. And there's a couple different things like going into Overzeal and things like that, special states like that, but they're generally on a whole a lot less common than the way you would use them in like a Dynasty Warriors or anything like that. So right here we got the basic attack. You can just hit square there, and then it will go into a combo. As you keep pressing it, you might have seen the different chain routes in the party select screen. You can also press triangle or to do a special attack, or hold it down to do a more continuous one, which varies depending on the type of character you are playing. And you can see, kind of, I've already destroyed 100 enemies. It's been about 30 seconds, which is pretty standard for the genre, but this scene in the original visual novel, which I looked up for reference, they're fighting about 4 enemies, and it's supposed to be a pretty big, tense scene for the main character, and you know, it doesn't exactly read the same when he can simply destroy a whole horde of them just like that. In addition to strong, to the light and strong attacks and the combinations thereof, there's also jumping moves. You can do that to kind of hit people from a distance or break up groups. There's a dodge. You can get a little bit more zeal by timing your dodges perfectly. And you can, there's the standard lock on. New to this is, well, different in this is that you can use different characters' skills as basically assists, and they go onto a little cooldown. And to do that, you just hold L1 and then press different buttons. Other than that, pretty standard. The one big thing, again, is those chain skills, as they're called. You can see over there, I got chain skill A and B. So this first one that I'm using here, I'll press it, and this is kind of a healing that builds up, I believe, Zeal and health. And as you do them, similar to the original game, Massive Deception, the prompt will come for chaining attacks, and if you do it with good timing, it will enhance the effect. And sometimes, I believe you can also do multiple follow-ups, depending on circumstances. Then you can also switch to an alternate. You can go in with 2, and my alternate one here is an attack. And then you can also set any of your skills, which I believe most characters have up to 4. You can set any of those to be your assist. As for the combat itself and how it holds up, it's probably, within the genre, it feels, the feel of it is decent, it's enjoyable, it's easy to do for long periods of time, of course, but it is not the best I've seen. There's definitely not a lot to it, and it really leans heavily on upgrading characters and learning skills and things like that. Oops, let me skip this. This is just to... So we're gonna head back into one of these. These are gonna be the free missions. These are where you're gonna get most of the combat from, since there's about just under 20 main chapters in the story mode, and some of those chapters are dedicated exclusively to telling stories. So they're not always the longest battles, and you're not going to really get the most of your characters out of there, especially since, aside from a few boss encounters, they're generally pretty easy and low in difficulty. I didn't really feel really challenged, aside from some specific bosses that do so much damage that I kind of had to be a little bit more careful, but upgrading the equipment a little bit basically put that difficulty away right away. The retelling of this story I think really suffers from the format and trying to fit it into an action game, to the point where, while I did find like some characters appealing and definitely found some appeal in the world and kind of politics of this game, I am kind of halfway through I ended up just skipping all the story scenes and playing Mask of Deception instead, since it did a much better job of telling the story and gave it some room to breathe. As for the combat here, again, it's pretty easy to pick up, pretty easy to go into. While it is nominally a Musou style crowd control game, a lot of the small mechanics and team dynamics really make it feel more of like an action RPG, something in the style of a Xenoblade, if you will. There is bonuses for hitting enemies from behind, which will deplete their brawn, and basically breaking down their brawn puts them into a vulnerable state that'll allow you to do more damage. And combine that with the team moves, the different skills your characters have, and other things like Overzeal, which give you different buffs and things like that. It really feels much more similar to a regular JRPG style combat, especially since a lot of the time and map management aspects are absent here. If we're going specifically for comparisons to the Warriors series, a lot of those games have a big heavy emphasis on multiple events happening, multiple submissions occurring at the same time, and working your time so that you actually strategically manage different characters and events. So the difficulty there is more about managing multiple points of attack and combat than it is about like fighting the individual units, which is pretty much absent here. The maps are pretty small, they get reused a lot, and your objectives generally won't require too much strategy, or ironically won't require a lot of strategic play, given that this was originally partially a strategy game. Mostly you're going to be watching gauges and resources and trying to keep your party members alive as you build up energy to chain attacks and deploy them at the right with the right timing. Again, similar to other games in the genre, minor enemies not really a threat at all. It's mostly going to be fighting generals and boss characters and using those fodder enemies to build up resources to beat them. Again, as one of these goes, it's pretty competent. The feel of it is pretty nice, and they do have a decent variety of characters and styles. If we switch over here to, I believe, Kuon is her name. I don't know how to pronounce that. She's much more of a very speed type character rather than Haku, which is a support style character. She can do a ton of damage, is very acrobatic, and can move quickly. You can see she's got a very acrobatic and airborne style. If we switch back to another character here, you can see that she's got more of a range style. She can fire arrows and stuff like that, deal with crowds pretty well. And then if we switch over here, we'll get these spellcaster twins who attack again from a range but use a variety of kind of slow casting but high damaging attacks and magic spells, which is a lot of fun. You can also do them in combination here to do stuff like send out homing projectiles against the enemy, or once you build up enough zeal, fire different amounts of elemental attacks. Oops. They're much slower. They attack in kind of staggered waves. They use a teleport instead of a regular dodge. But they're a lot of fun to use in a group and also call as supports. And there's a lot of variety in terms of that. Ideally, if you're coming into this, you're already a fan of Utawarerumono, and you're looking forward to experiencing the characters and world in a different way. It is nice, having played the visual novels, to see these characters with higher resolution models and nicer animations. There's definitely a big appeal to that, and being able to play through their different styles and level them up is a fun way to spend time with them. A big criticism I would have on that front is that the story, because of the way it's told, again, doesn't leave you with a lot to grip onto, and because of that, it's a little bit of a bummer that the free battle mode, even though they have different framing around the different battles, which you can see at the mission select screen, they don't really have any unique dialogue or anything like that. So you're not really going to get any new events or kind of fan service or deeper explorations of the world through there. It's really just playing through the same maps that you'd see in the story mode, with slightly different objectives and much better rewards in terms of gear and leveling up. And I get the feeling that this is the thing they kind of want you to do after you beat the story, because most of the options for playing the different free battle modes and upgrading gear are locked away until you complete that story mode. So it's really just kind of an add-on. It would be a much easier recommendation if they had a little bit more here on the side of different, character interactions and stuff like that that could be explored through free battle that weren't explored, in the story of the main story. But that's sadly a little bit lacking, and it's mostly trying to get by on the appeal of the combat, which is fun and again is enjoyable and has a good variety in terms of playstyles and things like that, but will not be something that you're going to keep going back to try to master or play around with, like the strategic layer and stuff like that. There's some appeal to leveling up the characters, especially since once they get to a certain level, they will be able to go into an overzeal state, and if you have all 3 bars filled up, you can do a final attack, which is sort of similar to the Musou finishers in a Warriors game, in that it gives you kind of a big dramatic release, but since they happen much less in this game, they'll since they happen much less in this game, they can kind of be a little bit more flashy and long-winded I've seen some of them go on for maybe a full 30 seconds, which has been really funny. Let's see if we can get one of those off right now. I'm about full. We're gonna pop into Overzeal. Not very flashy in terms of style switch, but then we can kind of, if we land one of those attacks, we can kind of get this elaborate final attack motion. Complete with, you know, a bunch of dialogue and spinning camera pans and things like that. Let's see if we can pop off some of these other ones. So yeah, there are a bunch of small tactical decisions and strategic things to do as far as elemental weaknesses, creating builds, and getting into the deep systems. But like a lot of Japanese RPGs, they kind of want it to be simple to kind of just get through everything without having to dig deep in, with lots of big space left over to dig in for the people who really love those systems. I don't believe that the game itself, by itself, really encourages you to dig into any of those. They never really feel necessary. You can kind of just button mash and dodge every once in a while to get through it. But it's there if you want to dig into it, and if you play on harder difficulties, you know, you might actually be incentivized to do it. Overall, I came away pretty positive from this game, even though I don't think it is in any way exceptional. The best thing I can kind of say about Utawarerumono ZAN is that it got me more interested in the world, and I ended up watching a bunch of episodes of the original anime that adapts the first game's story, and you know, picking up Mask of Deception to kind of flesh out my knowledge on the world and its characters, and I've been actually enjoying that. So it works as kind of an introduction to the world and characters, and as an ambassador for the series. But the way that it tells its story kind of does spoil a lot of... The way that it tells the story does spoil the entirety of Mask of Deception's story. You're much better served by playing Mask of Deception and going straight through there, because it kind of loses a lot of the impact the way that the story is told here, even if it's overall competently told. So we're gonna just jump into one more of these missions just to show off a little bit more of the combat, hopefully get another character's final attack shown off, things like that. But those are basically my thoughts on Utawarerumono ZAN. Again, it's a fun game that works as an ambassador to the series, but is mostly going to serve people who are already bought into the world and characters. As an adaptation of the story of Mask of Deception, really falls kind of flat despite building on the good voice work and strong writing of the original, thanks to the way that it abridges and cuts out a lot of the small details of the world. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review and my thoughts on this game. I'm going to leave you with a little bit more gameplay, but that's going to be it for me. Until next time, peace.
まったくあんちゃんといると退屈しねえぜ。